So for this project, one of the techniques I recommend, it's very swift and a good way of making kind of a nice even mug, is to use a slab technique using a prepared form. And today we're going to look at a couple of the forms that you can use. So if you save nice clean bottles, we've got this Pellegrino mineral water bottle. You can use a soup can. You can use anything that's basically got a nice round continuous form here. So if you have a piece that's more tapered inwards towards the top, so say you wanted to use this section to make a mug, that can be really difficult because when we pull the prepared form out of the clay slab, the thinner piece up here is going to be pushed aside by the thicker piece as it exits the clay. So you want to make sure you have something that's basically straight up and down, or if it flares out a little bit, that's fine too, because that will give you a good exit as it comes out of the lip. Okay? So I am going to use the soup can today, make a nice basic rounded mug form. And to prepare it, you want to make sure that you wrap something around it first, because otherwise anything that's shiny like plastic or metal, even the shiny paper, the clay will stick to it. And also the clay will, you can slightly see on here, the surface of the soup can has those ridges on there. If we were to press clay right on there, it would just stamp that pattern right into the clay. So we want to put something on there that's nice and smooth, that when we put the clay on there, it won't stick to the form. We'll be able to pull the form out easily out of the clay project that we do, and it won't transfer any of this texture. So I'm just using one sheet of newsprint. Daily journal works fine. Just keep it folded in half, just like this. Okay, and we want to remember that we need to wrap every surface of the piece that we're going to put clay on. So you want to make sure that you cover the bottom as well. This is a mistake that a lot of people make when they're first doing this project. They wrap the sides of the piece, and then when they put clay on the bottom, they forget that this is not covered, and then their bottom piece of clay sticks to the bottom form that you're using here. I want to make sure that we leave enough room at the bottom of this piece of newspaper here. And I'm going to fold that up just a little bit so we have a little extra, so when I'm done wrapping the sides of the piece, I can just push the extra newspaper onto the bottom there and tape it in place. So I'm just going to hold the newspaper nice and flush against the surface that I'm wrapping. And I'm not going to fold down the top here. Just leave that open like this and leave the bottom open like that for now. We're just going to tape the sides here. I've got my handy blue tape. So remember, you do not want to use any kind of plastic tape or shiny tape when you are using it underneath a piece of clay, because the clay will again stick to anything shiny. So use masking tape, painter's tape, some kind of dull tape is the best. Okay, you don't need to tape it super tight, just enough tape to keep the edges from flapping up. Keep it nice and secure. Okay, so if you have too much newspaper at the bottom, you can push the piece down a little bit. I think I can. That's also why you do not want to tape your newspaper to the form that you put inside there. Okay, so go down a little more. If you have too much newspaper pushed at the bottom, that looks good. Okay, so if you have too much newspaper down at the bottom, it makes the bottom kind of pillow out. And so when you try to put a slab on the bottom of the piece over the newspaper, it can push your clay out and make it bulge. So we don't want that either. So I'm going to take this, and once again, you do not want to tape the newspaper to the form. You just want to tape the newspaper to itself. I'm just folding the edges down. Just folding the edges down. very carefully there. Okay. Just going to take a piece of tape and secure that. Again, you don't want a lot of tape, just enough to secure the edges. I'm going to take some of those sharp bits, just kind of fold them down. You don't want those creasing and transferring to the inside of your mug. Okay, we are going to smooth out the inside, but enough, if you can do enough of the prep work beforehand, then you have less work to do on the back end. Okay. Okay, so keep that nice and secure, and then the newspaper won't unwrap around our clay. Okay. So now we have a nice form, like a mold, and we are not going to use the entire length of this piece here, okay? So we just have the newspaper open at the top like this, because when we have clay around this, we want to be able to remove the form from the inside the newspaper. So we want to keep the top open like this, okay? So you will remove the form and the newspaper in 2 stages, okay? And then next, we're going to roll out our slab and measure it for our mug. Okay, so we've rolled out our slab of clay, and here I have a piece of clay that's rolled out to about 1/4 of an inch thick. I've also rolled out quite a bit more than I'm going to need to wrap around the circumference of my project. And that is for 2 reasons. One is because when you have enough clay, and this strip of clay is a little over 20 inches, which is more than we're going to need, but you'll have more than enough to go around the prepared shape that you have to make your mug. You won't have to worry about coming up short. Also, you will have enough rolled and left over on a scrap to make the bottom of your piece, so you won't need to roll out more clay. The other reason we want more than we need, because when we roll out our slabs, they're kind of an irregular shape. So we want enough clay that when we put the ruler on here and measure it out, we'll have enough for a nice even rectangle. Okay, so we're going to cut the shape for our mug before we put it on our prepared object. So very often in the past, I've had students who have just taken this piece of clay and just wrapped it all the way around like this, and they left it really ragged and they didn't measure. They left it doubled up on the bottom like that, and then tried to slip it and cut it and fix it and do all this nonsense. You can save yourself ever so much trouble by not doing that. So this is the don't section. Do not do this. Okay? You can save yourself a world of trouble by just measuring and cutting the slab that you're going to need first. Okay? So we want to make sure that we know the height that we want. So you don't want too tall of a mug, otherwise it gets too heavy when the liquid's inside of there. But do keep in mind that this is going to shrink a little bit, so if you make a mug that's about 6 inches high, probably go down to about 5.5 to maybe even 5 inches, depending on your clay, how much it shrinks. If you do 5 inches, probably shrink down to about 4.5. That's about a good size for a mug. So I'm going to do the sides, both 5 inches. Okay. So this is a good reason to have more than enough clay that you need. So if I just had a tiny skinny strip like this, I would come up just a little bit short on the 5 inches I need to get the full straight edge length there. So I can bring my ruler down. Always draw your lines first before cutting out everything. So just start at the top there. Come down and stop right at 5. Leave a little mark there. Okay. So if you want to measure a 90-degree angle, you can. I have eyeballed this for years, so I will come back and make sure it is straight a little later. But this looks pretty good. Let's go to 12. Give us more than enough to go all the way around. We'll come come again on our corner here. I just make it there. Okay. There we go. Okay. Come back with my straight edge here, and it's just going to be enough to cut off that raggedy little bit at the top there that I don't want. Just lucky for me. Okay. Okay, so you can see even with a long strip of clay, I still needed more than enough to get the nice usable shape out. Okay, so we can cut off the clay around our shape. Remember to save the large scraps, because we're going to use one of them for the bottom of our piece. So use your straight edge to cut out. Okay. Go ahead and remove the scraps. Okay, make sure you're leaning your side of your needle tool into your straight edge. That'll give you nice, even edges when you cut. Sometimes I see people, they put their straight edge down and then they put their needle tool in this way, and that won't really give you a nice straight line. So this, just follow your line and cut on your original measurements there. Okay. So let's save these two large pieces here. So we've got our old friends, our scoring tools, our needle tool, and our slip. Okay. So what I find it easier to do is to roll this project. The short edge is towards you. Okay. That way you can see what the bottom is doing. It's a little more difficult if you've got the whole project. Even though if the bottom is facing you, sometimes it's hard to see if you're over like this or up like this. You want to make sure that the bottom is flush with the edge of the long edge of the slab here. Okay, so it comes down a little bit like that. If when you try to put your bottom on there, this part of your form is going to be sticking out. It's going to bulge out the bottom there. The opposite problem will happen if you leave a little gap here. You can see if you were to put the form so there was this edge of clay hanging out from the bottom of your form there, once again when you try to put the bottom on there, it's going to crush in this way. Okay, so go ahead and start. Okay, make sure that the bottom edge is flush there. You don't have anything sticking out. Okay, and just take the short end facing you and push it up on your form there, and then slowly and gently make sure you're keeping the edges parallel to each other. Roll that away from yourself. Okay. So carefully take the whole thing, don't tip it upright yet, leave it on its side. Okay, so you can see we've got this little extra. That's fine. We're going to trim that off. Okay, so don't take that and push that up there and slip it together, because you'll have a super thick piece on there. It'll be too thick to fire. Air can get trapped in there. We just want enough to grab the two edges together so we can slip and score those together and then smooth down the seam. So I'm going to take this. Just going to cut off that edge there. Keep it nice and even. So keep this still laying down. Let gravity work for you. We're going to unwind that for a moment while we slip. Okay, and your clay should be fairly moist when you're doing this, because bending the clay will cause it to get stressed out a little bit. So if your clay is just starting to edge away from freshness and a little more towards leather hard, it can be difficult to work with, and you'll know because the surface will crack. It'll be really hard to move. So make sure your clay is kind of like the consistency and tensile strength of a piece of American cheese. Okay, so we're going to do the other side here. I like to give it a little overlap like this. Sometimes people try to mate the two edges together so they just join right at the seam there. And that can make a weak spot in your mug where it can crack, especially when we're firing to the higher temperatures that we're going to fire to. Because even if you join that seam together really well, it's always going to remember that it had a gap there. So I think it's just better to deal with a little bit of a bulge here. This is the place where you can put your handle and hide this little bulgy bit here. So don't worry about the inside yet. We do have a little bit of overlap, but right now we're just going to worry about this outside seam. Okay, so we can turn this around and just press those together so the edges get nice and welded. Okay. Try to push those forward. Okay, and I'm pushing that down across the project like this instead of pushing it up like that, because I don't want to get pieces that bulge out from the top and the bottom here. So if I just push down crosswise like this, that'll keep most of my clay just across the surface of the mug there. So we can come back and smooth this a little more later. Okay, something else you can do at this point is you can, I don't do too much, but you can put it on the surface of your table and roll it back and forth like that. If you roll too much, you'll loosen the project up a lot because the clay will get thinner and stretch, and then it won't grip to your form as well. But if you do it a little bit just where you have the seam, it'll just kind of flatten out that area. Okay. Come in. Let's give it a little more light here. Okay. Okay. So don't worry about that too perfect just yet, but we do want to make sure that we've got our newspaper tucked in here. You want to make sure you don't have any bits of newspaper running out towards the outside edge of your slab there, because otherwise that can create a gap when we put the bottom on there. Okay, let's go ahead and slip the bottom ring where we're going to put the bottom. Okay. So now we've got our pieces of clay that were left over. We should have more than enough to fit on the bottom there. Okay. So make sure you've got enough clay to go all the way around that ring there. Okay. And when we lift it up, we can see from the slip, it's left an imprint where we know we can slip and score. Kind of stamps it on there. Just put a little slip around that ring there, just where it's going to attach to the belly of the mug. Okay, so now let's put that on there firmly. Okay. Make sure it's level, it's not leaning too much. Okay, and it's nice if you use the same slab that you cut out for the sides of the mug, because then you know everything is the same thickness. Okay. Okay. Good. So when we've got that attached on there, just go ahead and take your needle tool, come from the outside there, and I just kind of cut in there till I get to the sides. Keep your needle tool straight up and down. And you don't have to do any measuring, you're just using the mug shape as your pattern. Cut off the excess a little bit at a time, move what you don't need. Okay, so we're keeping our form in there for now while we do our smoothing. That will keep the mug shape from getting distorted while we're working on it. So if you're using a piece that's more tapered at the bottom like this, you'll have some gaps. So you want to be mindful to not press too hard, because there won't be anything back there except newspaper supporting the clay. So if you do push too hard, be mindful that you're going to stamp a little bit of a texture like this in there. So you got to be more careful. With a soup can, it's nice and strong. It's straight up and down, a nice, perfect cylinder. You're not going to get any surprises. Okay. So just gently push and smooth. Okay. So remember, with stages of leather hard clay, when it's super moist like this, it's going to transfer the texture and imprint of your fingers. So just do your large area kind of mass smoothing. Make sure your seams are blended. Don't worry too much about polishing and blending out everything. This is just more about shaping at this point. Okay. Also, you don't want to leave the form in there until the piece is dry. So at a certain point, when this firms up a little bit, just enough so it's no longer very flexible and responsive, super responsive when we touch it, to the point where it will crush in areas if it's not supported, we're going to take the form out, because if we allow the form of the clay to dry too much around the form, the piece inside will not shrink at the same rate the clay shrinks, and that will cause your piece to crack. So you want to make sure, right as this piece is getting to the point of leather hard, we are going to take our form out of there. Okay. Go back, make sure your seam is blended. So do all the big stuff now and worry about the cosmetic stuff when the clay is firm enough to be cut and is self-supporting.